Hello, I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and you are watching Tom Talks Rubbish. It's the place for interviews, wrestling reviews, and so much more.
Sure, you subscribe to Tom Talks Rubbish. I highly recommend you subscribe here first.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Talks Rubbish, and today I'm back with another interview. This time, I'm joined by Laurie from WrestleTalk. So how are you doing today, Laurie?
I'm very well, thank you, my friend. I am quite tired. I stayed up to watch All Out on Sunday night and then wrote a review at very early in the morning and then recorded a review at very early in the morning and then stayed until it was stayed until it was uploaded, went to bed for 2 hours, and then I went to Sheffield to go climbing with a friend of mine. So it's Tuesday now and I'm still not quite over All Out. But what a show. What a show.
Yeah. One thing I will say, All Out might not be very topical by the time this goes out.
No worries, it's fine. It's fine to say where we are today. It's fine.
Yeah, but at time of recording, we have probably had definitely the best wrestling show of the year.
I think so. Yeah, definitely. It's been. I don't think the wrestling was the best wrestling of the year. I think the Lucha Bros Young Bucks match was definitely like a contender for match of the year, for sure. I think a lot of the other wrestling was really great, but the moments that All Out gave us, I think will live in infamy for a very, very long time.
I saw someone on Twitter compare it to WrestleMania X7, like it's up there in some people's opinion.
I think the key with it is that it gave people hope in a way that I think WWE has done quite a job recently of kind of crushing hope. Like, I feel like the kind of WWE's been riding quite heavily on this idea that anything can happen in WWE. And also they've got this kind of glut of talent in NXT and signed onto their brand that could appear at any point, essentially, and sort of reinvigorate what is quite a stale product. However, they've let all those guys go. They've released a bunch of people who are very popular. Anyone who has come up, like, say, Karrion Kross, for instance, has ended up with a gimp as a gimmick. So, like, they've kind of lost the ability to really. They don't make magic in the way they did before, and I think what AEW did at All Out, that final moment where Adam Cole comes out and then Bryan Danielson comes out, was like wrestling magic. It was like, oh man, the landscape has shifted so much, and like. Yeah, like it was JR said, like, oh, the days to come. Like you can sense the palpable excitement from what they've got now, and you can see when you play with your toys, you're like, I want to play with this toy, and I want to do this. Like AEW has that roster. You can just chuck any of them in the ring in any combination. You're like, oh, that's an exciting match.
It's like I've just started doing some work for a wrestling YouTube channel called Last Fan Standing, and I have been tasked with putting dream matches together for the 2 debuts last night. And they said, you might as well do one for CM Punk while you're there. It took me 3 hours to think of, because I was like, but do you know what I mean?
Yeah, just one singular dream match is quite hard to kind of come up with, and you can't just be like, yeah, everyone against Bryan Danielson. Like that's what I want. That is what I want to see.
Because the main one that comes up is Kenny Omega at the minute. And this is going to sound awful, but it sounds like that's a boring answer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think because he's the champion, right, as well. Like it doesn't. Yeah. I think some of these, like when Kenny Omega's freed up, when hopefully they kind of give the belt to Hangman Page, which you assume is where it's going to go eventually. When Hangman wins, then you've got Kenny as a sort of attraction wrestler again, rather than being like, I am the champion, I have to be involved in the biggest storyline. Like Kenny can just be there to have these amazing matches with people again and rebuild kind of either the face turn or whatever, but rebuild the kind of Kenny Omega brand a little bit. I think he's got a very good brand, but I think they're doing this descent, and it's some people are being turned off of the Bucks and Kenny and the Super Elite in general because of the way they characterize their heels. I think it's very good heel work. How about you?
Yeah, I like it, but there are moments where you think, I don't want to compare it to Triple H Reign of Terror because I don't think it's that bad, but it's like they're all over the show. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, okay, I've seen enough of you. Do you know what I mean?
It's the I think it's like almost like a gut reaction though to what they had when they first started, which was they started out and they tried not to put themselves in the big positions. You know, they didn't really try and put the Bucks into the tag title picture immediately. They didn't try to put Kenny in the world title picture immediately. They're like, you know, they kind of were trying to build new stars and rely on kind of Jericho's star power as well, specifically to bring people in. And then they realized that, you know, actually the reason people wanted AEW to come into existence is because they just really love the elite on the indies. Like that's the reason it exists. So you should make that the focus of your TV show.
Sorry, man. I think maybe the reason I struggle to connect to them is because I wasn't a indie elite fan. Sounds like the wrong word, but you know what I mean.
There's a lot to keep up with, I think, in terms of those guys. Like they put out a lot of non-televised content. Yeah. So to get the full breadth of the story has required quite a lot of either going back and researching what they were doing before, or you had to be there experiencing it as they were on the indie scene. Like they were in NJPW, they were in Ring of Honor, and they were doing all of this stuff, and they were being the elite. And you had to have that kind of coherent, cohesive view of the whole thing, kind of zoomed out, looking at all of it to understand some of the references and stuff they put in there. And I think now with AEW, there's still stuff not happening on the TV show that influences the TV show.
Even
which I don't think
on
the
TV show.
Yeah, I think that would be really clever, actually. You know, that would could solve a lot of the problems.
But then again, and we will get into your career and stuff in a minute. Like it's just all out very topical as we're recording this, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing that I can't stand with AEW is like CM Punk compared it to on an interview with Renee Paquette recently, where he said the win-loss records remind him of Bill Goldberg sometimes. In the sense that he'd be undefeated, he'd be 10-0 one week and then 25-0 the next week.
I never minded that.
Oh, really?
To be fair, I loved Goldberg as a kid, and I was dumb, and I just thought, like, where's he getting all these wins from? It must be a show that I'm not watching. And I didn't mind that, but yeah, I think the wins and loss record is good to have. I think.
I love that they do it.
Ignore mostly though. It's only relevant. It's good to have it there as a mechanism to trigger a title match, if you know what I mean, rather than it being a focus of it shouldn't be interesting for every character. It's only interesting for someone. WWE forgets quite often that people are undefeated or defeats them in a stupid way. Yeah. Like Karrion Kross, for instance.
Oh, yes. But you mentioned Goldberg there. So was WC, if we take this back to, were you a wrestling fan as a kid?
I was a wrestling fan as a kid. I was one of those poor unfortunate souls that didn't have Sky though. So
that
my
seems
wrestling
really common. The more I've done these interviews.
Yeah, my wrestling exposure was Sunday Night Heat, basically replay on Channel 5, and any WWF stuff that I could see at a friend's house in the morning, usually on like a Saturday or Sunday when they did the replays. That was about it. And then it was buying VHSs of all things of the pay-per-views and stuff, and just sort of watching them and being like, I have no idea how we got here from the last one that I watched, but whatever, like, let's see. And then you realize that WWE has quite good recap packages. But yeah, you're mostly just watching things. I was kind of watching it all in the weird abstract of wrestling, I guess, like when you just see the big stuff and you don't really understand the kind of nuance of how you got there. Yeah, and not even all of them. It was just it was just dipping in and out. I had my favorite characters. I played a lot of the wrestling video games. That was a thing I did quite often. But yeah, just through sheer it being inaccessible to me, I just couldn't be as into it as I probably would have been otherwise, you know?
I'll put it this way. If the technology that we have available now was available during your childhood, how much of a wrestling, and the era was still the same, how much of a wrestling fan do you reckon you would have been?
I would have been a massive wrestling fan, I think, as a kid. If WWE Network existed, or, you know, things were actually being shown on UK TV like they are now, like, it would be much easier for me, or the fact that everyone just has digital TV now, like, I would have been so into it, because I was already very, very invested in the people that I liked. I loved The Rock, I loved Undertaker, I loved Mankind, like Stone Cold. I could take or leave, like, but I just was really, yeah. I wasn't really like massive. I like the Stunner. Everyone liked the Stunner. Like, Stunner was the thing you did at school to everyone, but I wasn't ever really like massively into his wrestling. I thought The Rock was always just so much more of a interesting person to watch. He was always saying funny stuff. He was always like, his just way in the ring, like, was captivating to me. And I thought Stone Cold's kind of limited the limitations of having had your neck broken, essentially, like, showed to me, and I didn't really like it. Like, I think he was a great character, but I don't think he was
back then.
I don't know. He never sucked me in the way that like Rock did or Undertaker did, with the kind of presence. And like, yes, I bloody loved the American Badass Undertaker.
Did you?
That exact? So yeah, it was just the period of time, man. Like, I was like, cool, he's got a bandana and he rides a motorbike. I like it. Give me more of that.
So what is your thoughts on Dead Man Undertaker then?
Dead Man Undertaker, I enjoy. And I really do like Dead Man Undertaker, but it's that sort of, it's when he's good in the ring. I don't like the character never necessarily works outside of the ring. Like, he's much more of I feel like Undertaker's one of those ones where he's very good when someone else is talking about him as a character. Do you know what I mean? Rather than his...
Not really. Would you mind elaborating a little bit?
Yeah, I feel like, you know, like when you've got a Bray Wyatt talking about calling out The Undertaker, this kind of mystical, enigmatic figure, it's the monster. It's like, Alien isn't hosted by Alien, you know, by the Xenomorph. Yeah. The Xenomorph isn't the main character of Alien. It's the threat, and it's other people's reaction to it that makes it interesting. And I feel like with Undertaker,
I see what you're saying.
That is always the case. Other people's
reaction is more what you think works with Undertaker.
Yeah, and I think, you know, and then obviously, like, he's a very good entrance, but it's a very similar entrance over and over again. And then he was fantastic in the ring for a period of time, and he had these amazing matches back to back. That's what I always loved about the character, was like, he's the monster, and he's just interesting. And the more they made, the more human he ever became, the less you care, really. Apart from, I don't know, I just loved the American Badass because I liked motorbikes at the time. That's it's that simple.
Fair enough. So have you had the way people always phrase it in interviews is drop-off period?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I had quite a hefty drop-off period because I wasn't really watching it with any regularity. I probably dropped off from like my late teens to until I was 25, I think, 26.
What year are we talking about?
We are talking about the heist of the century is what we're talking about. That was literally the night. And I'm so bad at numbers that I can never remember what WrestleManias are. 31. So 31 was the night, and I was drunk in a pub with my best mate, and we both looked. We were just talking, and we went, "Oh, WrestleMania's tonight. Why don't we go home and buy WrestleMania and watch WrestleMania because we don't have work tomorrow?" It was a drunk decision, and we watched WrestleMania, and then we were like talking about then, like, because it was actually quite a good show. We both were like, I could watch more of this. And then we were talking about it, and we ended up,
in my opinion.
Yeah, I really liked it. It had the RKO off the stomp. Like, it had a lot of stuff in it where you were just like, okay, this is like, these are really cool moments, and it felt like a good introduction to a lot of the characters that WWE had been doing at the time. yeah, I just got into it from there. And then we were sort of talking about it. And that's when I started watching NXT because I'd heard NXT was very good. And I became like, NXT was the thing that I just regularly watched basically every week.
Sorry, man.
It's all right. Go on.
Was this wasn't during the reality show time, but it was during sort of what I would call not the 2016-17 era, 17-18 era, sorry. It was more I'm trying to think, like the Bo Dallas era.
No, so this was at the time I started watching NXT. NXT was Sami Zayn had just dropped the title to Kevin Owens, and Kevin Owens was the champion.
Oh right.
So yeah, it was basically Owens as Balor came in, and then from Balor onwards, and I watched it regularly up until essentially the podcast stopped, and then I've sort of dip in and out now.
Fair enough. So when it comes to that, leads me nicely onto my next question. What wrestling do you watch? No, I'll start here first. How did it come then to, I'm just going to dip in and out of wrestling, to I'm going to get a job in wrestling?
That was an accident. I've always worked in telly. I did, I worked at a student TV station when I was at uni, and I wanted to make videos essentially. And then I sort of went into making a bunch of review stuff for a gaming channel. And I worked there for 3 years. Then I worked at ITN for a bit, making news videos and producing other TV shows, basically. Then I went freelance and did a bunch of shooting and editing jobs, basically with the likes of PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo, and then some other
adverts for them.
Yeah, it was online videos for their YouTube, essentially.
Okay.
Things with GameSpot and stuff like that too. There was a lot of mostly video game focused, but there was some other more corporate stuff in there. Done a lot of work with Pokemon as well. And then I was sort of doing that, and I was freelance. And then Luke is married to someone I went to university with.
Okay.
So I knew Luke through her, obviously. And me and Luke had always sort of talked about wrestling at parties and when we'd gone to the pub and stuff, and been we just had a lot of chats about wrestling. And then Luke was going on holiday, and he said, "Oh, I'm going on holiday, and I need to get someone to cover me. Do you want to try it?" Because they've been, the WrestleTalk guys have been basically having a lot of people come in who were quite, they were fans of wrestling, but they weren't particularly good at delivering the news in the style that WrestleTalk delivers the news in. Because Ollie wanted it to kind of be coherent and cohesive, because obviously when you introduce new people on YouTube, there's a little bit of friction sometimes if you don't do it in a way that kind of makes people buy into that person immediately. So when Ollie had brought Luke on board, there'd been a bit of back and forth with the fans about, oh no, it's no longer just Ollie. I don't like the fact that it's no longer just Ollie. So when they were bringing me in, they wanted someone who was going to sort of be able to do the news the way that they did the news, with the jokes and the kind of energy. And I did a sort of screen test for them, and that went quite well. And then we obviously came up with all the El Fakador storyline to be hey, look, you might like this now because there's a story that's going on and it's stupid and we know it's dumb.
Can we go back a little bit? I apologize. My interviews go all over the place.
That's all right, mate. Don't worry. What would you like to know?
I had this question because I put a question thread up for that we were doing this interview. So where did El Fakador come from?
Yeah.
And what is the meaning behind El Fakador?
What is the meaning? It's meaningless, ultimately. The meaning is whatever you want to give, all things. The meaning is whatever you decide the meaning. I guess it's a character. I don't really know. I assume mostly it's me now, but it definitely was a character back in originally. But yeah, the El Fakador storyline came out of the idea that we were just going to introduce me with a mystery. Something that was going to make it so that it was kind of obvious that Luke was going to be coming back. It was quite obvious that we were covering for a holiday when Luke said he was going to go and he was kidnapped.
Oh, so you wrote him off WrestleTalk sort of thing.
Essentially, yeah. We said like we basically like I kidnapped Luke and then I pretended to be Luke for 2 weeks and Ollie didn't notice, and that was the joke. The overarching joke of the kind of that 2 week period was that Ollie didn't know that I wasn't Luke. And then when Luke is found and comes back, because they wanted to keep me on, they then brought me in as El Fakador, the security, with the mask and everything to hide my identity. And that was the idea then being that, yeah, like they wouldn't again know that it was me. And so we basically did the same joke twice, as we like to do, like ride that joke until it's dead, flog that dead horse.
Fair enough. So when it comes to then revealing yourself as Laurie Blake, how did that come about?
I think I just went, I don't want to wear the mask anymore, ultimately. Like, we had to do the reveal to be like, it was me all along. Obviously, because otherwise it's a bit stupid if I was just going to wear the mask and never be like, hey, you remember the fake Luke guy? It's me, the fake Luke. And then we did the whole, like, those guys had to team up with me to take on Cultaholic and that kind of thing. So that's kind of where
That's how I found you guys randomly.
Oh, really? That's what sort of necessitated the reveal, essentially, was that I had to reveal who I was so that we could go up against Cultaholic and do that whole.
And I mean this with no disrespect. If it comes across that way, I apologize. My main wrestling YouTube consumption was the What Culture guys.
How dare you? How dare you? No, it's fine, Tom. It's fine. I think most people's YouTube consumption was What Culture before everything happened with them. So
when they came over to Cultaholic, obviously I followed them over. And then I remember this. Was it Ross that threw out the challenge? I think. It was Ross that threw out the challenge, I think.
So we had Adam in a video we had Pacitti in a video of ours. He appeared.
He invaded, correct?
Yeah. So Ollie went into some sort of weird matrix thing inside the YouTube algorithm in our story.
Oh,
and inside the YouTube
algorithm, sort of
inside the YouTube algorithm was the person who'd been messing with WrestleTalk, and it was Adam Pacitti. And so then we built from there. But then, yeah, Ross did a challenge video for us. Jack did a fake news video, which I think they should adopt as their regular news star because Jack nailed it. It was great. Really fantastic. And then we just did some back and forth stuff to sort of hype this and then build to the sort of event at MediaCon where we did the kind of
punishment on stage, correct?
Yeah, we did the joint panel and then us lot had to do a dance.
So whose idea, what you may be able to answer this, you may not. Whose idea was it we're going to we're going to do a collaboration with Cultaholic for predictions?
I think like at the time, most conversations ended with, should we do a collaboration with Cultaholic? And like we've had we've had fairly good contact with them over the years. Like the reason we don't really do stuff with them, I guess, is more the fact that nobody has time. Everyone's making their own stuff much more regularly. And I think it's more the fact that we knew that this event was coming up, and that's where the kind of stars aligned in. There was a payoff to the thing that was going to get people to buy tickets to this event, and the Cultaholic guys would do a panel with us and we could do kind of WrestleTalk versus Cultaholic on stage. So that's where that kind of idea came from. But I think it was always floating around in the ether that, we should do something with Cultaholic because we'd always kind of been in contact with them and chatting to them.
Okay, I understand. So if we go again, I jump around all the places. So as I was going to say originally before I asked how you got into WrestleTalk, like what do you do for WrestleTalk now, and what are you required to watch wrestling wise?
What do I do for WrestleTalk? Well, what I'm required to watch wrestling wise is quite a small amount actually, because I'm not on any of the regular content in the sense that I don't do any of the review podcasts anymore. I do
Why did the
live
NXT
reaction
one
stuff.
get cancelled?
Not enough people were watching it to necessarily make it viable
Feasible?
for us. It was they take up a long time to sort of do, and we would, at the time especially, we weren't doing it live, so we were recording it, we were uploading it, we were recording it, we were exporting it, we're uploading it, and we're then uploading it to making a podcast version and uploading that too. With nobody watching it necessarily, it just wasn't brilliant for us to kind of spend all that time doing it, because it was clashing on a day with AEW as well. And so there's the balance with our stuff is always how many things can you put live in a day before they start to eat each other.
Because a lot of yours is podcast related, like live reviews.
Well, yeah. So this is the thing I've always been talking about with WrestleTalk stuff behind the scenes, and one of the things that is a point of interest for us specifically is, back when we started doing WrestleTalk, when I started at WrestleTalk, we reviewed Raw and SmackDown, and that was, you watched 3 hours of Raw, 2 hours of SmackDown, and you spent an hour doing a review. So that's like a day's work essentially. Yeah. But then you're doing a news episode every single day as well. Then you get AEW, then you get NXT. So suddenly, to even get to the point where you're allowed to review the things, to get to the point where you need to review the thing you need to review, you have to watch 10 hours of wrestling as well. To then do 5 hours worth of talking, plus extra hours worth of uploading and all that stuff. So then if that content is then beginning to consume itself by the fact that we just found that more people were interested in us talking about AEW than they were in us talking about NXT. And by the virtue of having to put those two things out on the same day, because everyone expects those reviews on the same day, and we can't push NXT back another day because people are going to watch it even less when it's not as relevant. It just became the economic decision to stop doing the NXT podcast from a time perspective.
Yeah, I get you. So to go back to my original question, what are you either required to watch for your job, or what wrestling do you watch now?
What I'm required to watch is whatever I'm writing about, really. I watch pay-per-views if I happen to be on the live reactions, or I am the jamp, as I have been for a very long time. And then I just watch, I guess I just dip in and out and watch what I want to watch. If I hear a match is good, I tend to watch the match. I don't keep a regular schedule of I watch all these shows, but I do tend to, my main source is I read reviews, and then I catch up on the clips on WWE's YouTube channel for Raw and SmackDown, because I'm not that fussed about watching them. I'll then go find the matches on Raw and SmackDown to watch later, like the full length version of it if I liked the look of it. AEW, I tend to watch a bit more kind of longer portions of the show, and then NXT, I tend to kind of watch the full thing when I can.
Okay. So you basically said what you would watch over time, but let me start this again. So where did the idea for Explained come from then? Because that seems to be your baby.
Explained was my idea. I mean, there's a series called Explained on Vox. I don't know if you've watched any of Vox's content.
Not really.
They're an American outlet. They make really, really good short form documentary stuff and news. And it's about there's all sorts of subjects that they cover, from current political climate, older stuff. They've got all these kind of spin-off series where they analyze photos and stuff like that. I think the Vox Media stuff is amazing. And they were doing a series called Explained. There's a Netflix version of it as well, where they just took a concept and they explained that to you. And that was kind of, it's not really an idea in the sense that I stole it, but my feeling about it was, no one is making this kind of documentary about wrestling. People are doing I think people's consumption of wrestling media is much more news and review focused and stats based than what I
would
wanted to
agree
do.
with that. Or
I thought that. Go on.
No, I interrupted you. Sorry.
So yeah, I thought with that being kind of the way that a lot of people view wrestling, like a lot of wrestling coverage is sports centric rather than narrative centric or televisual centric, in the sense that like it's sports presentation wrapped in what, you know, Vince thinks he's making films. He's not making very good films, but he thinks he's making films, and nobody's really talking about wrestling in that sense of like, no one's necessarily doing like, there's all these channels out there that deep dive into a movie trailer, or here's all the references you missed in Loki, or whatever the hell it is. And no one's really doing that for wrestling to that degree of like the level of research that people put into those kind of videos. I don't think people are doing speculative videos and like talking about it, but I don't think anyone's putting the actual shift in to go like, here's this thing that wrestling's only just touched on briefly with a deep dive. Like, you know, I feel like I pitched it with the idea of,
who did you pitch it to? Ollie?
I just pitched it to Ollie. I just said like, this is what I want to make. It was it's an easy conversation. We had Parts of Unknown starting up, so I just said like, this would be a thing I want to do. I want to look at The Fiend because it's the hot thing at this moment in time. And I think he's doing a lot of interesting stuff that is cryptic about his past in wrestling, which I think people will be looking for answers for. But he's also drawing really heavily from popular culture in a way that, you know, a few other wrestlers have done and I've tried to cover. But that was part of my goal with the series, was actually to show as little wrestling as possible. Like I wanted it to be, I almost wanted it to as much as possible be talking about the thing that isn't the wrestling.
Yeah.
If you catch my drift.
So like, thing that I love about the Aleister Black episode is you don't talk about his wrestling style. You talk about the background of his character a lot more.
Yeah. So that was kind of, that's what's kind of wrapped up in that idea of like, I think wrestling fans get quite tunnel visioned on wins and losses, and like, he won this, he didn't win this, he did this, his moves are this, he's been champion this many times, and that's interesting if you're that way inclined. I've just told you that, like I told you earlier, I'm not very good at numbers. I can't remember what WrestleMania numbers anything is, because stats really don't interest me. And remembering that stuff, actually, I'm more interested in like what matches happen and what moments happen and what the story was, rather than like what number the show was or how many times someone's been the champion. So for me,
yes,
the Aleister Black thing and looking at the kind of the makeup of the character is something that I'm really interested in, because he's doing a lot of like breadcrumbing, essentially, of like, I'm going to lead you this way. Here's a clue to this thing. Here's a clue to this thing. And then when you put it all together, you can kind of paint this nice picture talking about history and lore and religion and all that kind of juicy mythology stuff that I really, really like.
Okay. So you talked about earlier having to deep dive for research for Explained, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it you that's doing all the research and stuff, or do you have a team behind you that's doing the research?
No, I do all of it. Every single bit of Explained I do on my own.
Okay.
So I research the whole show. I write the script. I present it. I do the camera. I edit it. I upload it. The only thing I don't do is make the thumbnail often, because I'm rubbish at Photoshop. But that's about it.
Damn, I.
It's too many things, man.
It's too like complicated.
It's not intuitive enough. I need to give me more buttons. Give me more obvious. Like, press that does that. That's all I need to know. It's stupid to be able to edit nicely and not be able to do Photoshop, but that's me. There we are.
Yeah. So with Explained, you obviously do most of it, but like, what has been the hardest episode to research, do you think?
Oh, what was hard? I think it's normally ones where it's like it falls into a wrestling blind spot, I guess. Is like, I think the championship belts one was quite hard to make because there's not a lot of information out there about it. So like people are interested in championship belt designs, but they aren't necessarily interested in, people haven't previously gone, oh, I'm going to go find out how this is made. People who make belts are quite busy and quite hard to get in contact with. So like I tried to get in contact with quite a few people who design belts. So instead I had to sort of fall back on what was available online. And that's usually the sort of the difficulty of research with Explained, is finding someone who is an expert in something that I'm not an expert in to tell me about that thing. So for instance, I spoke to the lovely guy who ran the Samoan Heritage Center in Samoa, and about the tribal chief stuff. And that was, that was really helpful because it wasn't, I'd read a lot about it in the sort of initial research phase of like trying to find out all this stuff, but I really needed somebody to kind of give that information some authority and some kind of credibility in that episode, but also to, for me to kind of a sounding board of me sort of going like, well, I've watched, because obviously the guy I spoke to hadn't really watched much of the wrestling, but I could explain the stuff that was happening in the wrestling to him and say like, does this have any bearing culturally to what we're talking about? So there was a much longer conversation that obviously got cut down for that episode, and it was just very illuminating and fascinating to sort of go like, here's the crazy thing that WWE is doing. Is it actually a subtle thing about this or this or this or this? And in some cases, and some of the things that made it into the episode, it was, like that storyline specifically with the acknowledge me, I'm the tribal chief stuff with Jey Uso and Roman Reigns, had a lot of culture baked into it that wasn't the focus and wasn't being like explained to the audience. And that was the thing I was going to say earlier, actually. It was like, that was almost a pitch to me in sense of like talking to Ollie about Explained, is that wrestling quite often draws from people's heritage or people's culture or from popular culture willy-nilly without necessarily just to really tell your audience stuff like that. So like for me, when you had Samoan wrestlers on WWF when I was growing up, I know nothing about Samoa. But they would say like these guys are from Samoa, they've got a proud heritage, but this is before the internet was like properly available as well. So like me finding out about Samoa, the only thing I knew about it was that The Rock was part Samoan. That was about it, And so for me, it was interesting to be like, okay, well, why don't we dive deeper into this stuff? Why don't we look at like why wrestling does these things that have almost become part of the fabric of wrestling, but I don't think people were necessarily talking about like the history of it. And like I wanted to make the series that like when you first got into wrestling, what are the things you Google when you first get into wrestling? But like that's what I want to make sure that Explained will eventually have. And like, how do wrestlers bleed? Like I've made the blading episode, like, does this hurt, etc. Like essentially, like I'm going to try and make those episodes in the future. That's what I want Explained to have, is the breadth of content, so that it could be your first port of call when you first get into wrestling to find out all the stuff. And then it has loads of stuff in there, obviously, for actual wrestling fans, like
that's really cool,
who are really up on their stuff.
So you talked, I'm very interested in the process of Explained, if that makes sense. So like, how much time between coming up with an idea and it going on camera? What's the sort of time frame? Is that the right word?
Yeah. Some of them have been quite slow. It depends on the subject, really. Like if I know, like the Aleister Black one was actually the quickest episode I've ever made. I made it in 3 days. But I already knew a lot of the stuff he was referencing. So for me, obviously, like I just had to I'd also been like quite invested in Aleister Black as a character previously, so I'd watched a lot of the stuff already. So I didn't have to go back and watch too much of the wrestling. I kind of already had an inkling of like what things he was alluding to with the stuff that he was saying, and kind of could ping off in a few different directions. So like I actually one evening made some notes about what I thought I was going to look at the next day. The next day I did further research and wrote the script. Then I recorded it and edited it in a day, essentially.
That's
so
cool.
like it kind of was probably about a three to 3.5 day project overall. But other ones have been longer, depending on how much I know, depending on if I need to talk to someone, I'm waiting to talk to them. But yeah, like it can be a slow process when there's not a lot of information out there and you have to dig quite deep to find it. Or you're trying to read, like, you know, I always try and find some obscure bit of something from Carl Jung or something to like chuck in there to be like, does this make sense about this character? And that's when you have to read a lot of and stuff. You're like, okay, great.
So when it comes to like, because there's not actually a lot of information about wrestling, even though the curtain's been pulled back quite a bit on the actual shows, there's not a lot of information. Maybe there is, and I've just never researched it, about how blading is done or how certain tricks are done. So how are you finding these sort of things?
Blading was okay because blading has been covered in obviously the 2020 documentary covered blading, and Eddie Mansfield showed everyone how to do it on that. It was also covered in like the Secrets of Wrestling Exposed. Do you remember that? Like the kind of, it was like the it was like the Masked Magician style show. It was in that as well, and like the passing over the blades. There was like the information was there to kind of find. And then it became more about finding people with slightly different takes on that story of blading. And really, for me, the focus of that episode was more about the kind of health issue around it than the kind of how to do it. Because the how to do it was the sort of thing that gets your YouTube video taken down, I guess. So
yeah, I get you. Has my internet frozen?
Stuff. You're okay to me?
Oh, cool. It's back now.
Nice. So yeah, I guess with the more obscure stuff, it's always more of a case of digging a little bit deeper or finding somebody to talk to. But I think wrestling, it's wrestling's own secrets that are like the stuff that's harder to prize out. The stuff that's easier to prize out is when wrestling.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Wrestling's own secrets.
It's with its own secrets. It's much more a case of you just end up having to Google a lot because someone will have talked about it on a podcast somewhere. Now, like that's the good thing in the modern era. Like all bets are off, and people love to tell the secrets on podcasts. So like the info's out there, but it just takes a lot of filtering to find like the interesting news story and stuff that's not just like a small headline about something, you know?
Yeah. So like, what has been the most obscure fact you've either found about wrestling or about a subject that you've covered and explained?
Oh man, I don't know. My brain just goes all facts leave it once I've stopped doing it. I thought the stuff about like Green Mist was one that I was very interested in personally to start making the video on. And I found it really fascinating, the kind of like how that was come up with and how it almost was like there was kind of this allusion to it being a sort of Japanese mystic thing, but it wasn't. It was invented by Gary Hart. Like it all comes from somewhere else, and it's all kind of muddied up in the way that wrestling presents it. It's like it's only been done by these certain people, so you assume that it must have come from here. And like Moot is obviously really famous for doing it, and Great Kabuki as well. So like you just think in your head, because wrestling doesn't tell you any different, that's where something comes from. And I think that was, for me, one of the more interesting bits to kind of come up with, like the idea that they were just sitting around in his house being like, I'm just going to fill condoms full of this green liquid mouthwash stuff and spit it at people. That'll be cool. I'll get this guy to do it.
Fair enough. So what are some explained videos you want to make, if you can talk about it, obviously, that you have possible ideas for? Or maybe even ones that you've scrapped in the past?
So I actually literally have a list of these in front of me. I want to do one. So the one I'm currently working on, and it's probably gonna, don't know when this podcast is gonna go out, mate. But
it might be
probably
out because this is going out in October.
Okay, cool. So the one that I've just, I'll do it like it's just happened. The one that I've just finished working on, but I haven't actually started because of when we're recording this, is on Finn Balor. So I'm going to do where the demon comes from, essentially, as we've had the tease that the demon might be coming back, and probably
was that
it's
on
going to be back
this
in time.
week, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, so they did the heartbeat thing at the end of the match, seemingly setting up the fact that the demon will return for Extreme Rules. So my plan is, Tom, and this is obviously the way you do a YouTube, is you try to tie your explained video with its weird focus on random bits of wrestling into something that's happening in wrestling that people are Googling. So that will be what I'll do this week, and next week, and then it will go out. Other ones I really want to look at are, what I really want to look at is Russian characters in wrestling. So I want to sort of look at that kind of, because wrestling kind of decided to continue the Cold War a long time after the Cold War had finished. So I want to kind of look at that, because I think the historical context is so interesting with that stuff. So I kind of want to look into like the way that Russians have been depicted in WWF and wrestling in general as kind of these heel bad guy characters, and why that's continued beyond the end of the Cold War and stuff like that. So that's one I'm probably going to work on. But the conversation to always have is, what's the title and what's the thumbnail? So I don't know if that's like, I don't know if that's juicy enough to entice people to watch it, but it's one I really want to make.
Well, not just that. I suppose with the way that you do history and stuff that may have been, and the way I'll phrase it is, stuff that YouTube may have allowed 5 years ago, maybe they won't allow now.
What do you mean by that?
Like, say, for example, you put an image of someone bleeding from blading.
Mm-hmm.
They could be quite funny about, oh, that depicts violence. That shouldn't be on YouTube. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. No, we got limited ads on that video. So despite it being the most watched explained video, it's probably made the least money because we got limited ads because it's got so much blood in it. That's so, yeah. Good idea, Laurie. Good idea.
So what I mean is, do you have to take into account like YouTube's guidelines, I suppose, when creating the thumbnail?
Yeah,
the title.
So we always try to, with all the content that we make, we try to take into account what the guidelines are. You don't want to hamstring your video before it even comes out, right? Like you want it to, you want the content to kind of live and breathe. And we're not covering something that, like, wrestling itself, people don't seem to mind the stuff being like, WWE is one of YouTube's biggest partners, so they don't mind wrestling being on YouTube. They just don't like blood, they don't like nudity, and they don't like extreme violence. So, like, as long as you can avoid those things, or at least tone them down in some way, and don't swear too often in the video, you're usually okay. I think wrestling and Russians will be fine as a topic. I don't think it's one of the ones that will cause a stir, as long as we're careful about what we say and how we say it, which obviously I always try to do, and always try to be as
diplomatic,
but also sensitive to the, you have to know where the line is of what you're allowed to talk about as the person making the video, and what you need somebody who is more of an expert in the field to talk about. And that's the judgment that you need to have.
Okay. So we've been going for about 50 minutes now. So I will probably just wrap this up soon. So I will do my wrap-up questions if that's okay.
Yeah, no worries, man.
But as always, to my guest, I want to say thank you for coming on, Laurie.
No, oh, pleasure to be here, mate. Pleasure to be here.
So, like, obviously, you were a wrestling fan during the Attitude Era, and then dropped off for a little while, and then came back for Mania 31, sorry, not 21. But what's your favorite match of all time?
Oh, I hate questions like this. It's fine. No, it's more just because I'm so like I don't do favorites. Like I'm really bad at having a favorite anything.
Okay, what's the best match of all time then?
The best match of all time. It's one of the Okada ones, isn't it? Like I'm just going to go on. I'll just do what Meltzer says. I don't know, man. Like I like a lot of wrestling matches. I think for me, the ones that have made me feel the most are the Gargano and Ciampa matches after the heel turn. But because I think the way that I've watched wrestling since, because obviously because I missed a good chunk of wrestling, I had to go back and watch stuff. And I've watched stuff and it's been great and I've really enjoyed the matches, but I've not been invested because I've just dipped in for a pay-per-view match and just seen a pay-per-view match. And I wasn't watching the product week to week, but I was watching NXT so religiously at the time. And then when the Ciampa Gargano feud kicked off, those matches meant the world. So I think for me, maybe they'd have to be my favorite matches.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I can understand what you're saying. You struggle to invest in stuff you've watched not that you've watched previously, that has previously happened because you weren't watching it live.
I think the point, yeah, because I think the key with wrestling is that it is both a skilled sporting style event in which you can watch the drama unfold in a ring and you can watch the action and go, that was very good action. And then there is also the narrative investment that you have in the characters and in the long run story. So I'm sure that if you've been watching AEW week to week and down the line Hangman Page wins the AEW World Championship, you are going to feel more about that match than someone who just watches that match.
Yeah. So the example Stephen Larson gave when I interviewed them was they loved the end of an era Hell in a Cell match because they watched all of the Shawn Michaels matches. They obviously watched Shawn Michaels when they were younger with Taker. They watched all the Triple H stuff in the build-up. Yeah, I think I'm similar. That I put it this way in that interview of I love if a match is good, I'll say it's good. I'll never say it's a bad match. But for example, certain matches on certain cards, I'll be like, that was good, but not as good as others because I wasn't as invested.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what favorites are. But I feel like sometimes when you work in this space, it feels like there are correct answers and there are incorrect answers because people are very keen to tell you why you're wrong. So sometimes it's better just not to have favorites.
Have your own favorites, man. You're entitled to your opinion.
Well, yeah. No, but sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes those opinions are wrong.
Opinions aren't wrong.
Opinions can be wrong. The internet has told me they are allowed to be wrong.
Fair enough. So you're gonna maybe hate this question, but what's your favorite pay-per-view?
My favorite pay-per-view. My favorite pay-per-view brand is Takeover. Do with that what you will. I don't know. I don't. My consumption of wrestling has only been watching whole pay-per-views now, and then all the pay-per-views for the last 20 years, I've just watched the matches in the abstract and never just sat and watched a whole pay-per-view. I don't have time to sit and watch a whole pay-per-view, frankly. So I will dip in and watch the matches that I need to watch, either for work or because I want to enjoy them, or because I tend to watch a wrestler's body of work rather than watch the whole, all the pay-per-views in a row. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. So to wrap this up, this is the wrap-up question that I am sort of toiling with as my like standard wrap-up question for everyone. With YouTube, we're obviously like all being well, provided YouTube doesn't suddenly shut down, we're gonna live forever. Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
So what is one video if people wanted to know what your interview style, sorry, not interview, presenting style or like style of YouTube videos are that you would want people to check out? And what is one that you're like, that can go, I do not like that,
Ooh.
etc.
The one that could go is the explained about empty arenas, because it hasn't done very well, and I don't like it dragging down how well all the other ones have done. The one that hang on, sorry, I'll tell you, because this is the thing, mate. I made a video many years ago at ITN, and I must have made it in about half an hour. Let me show you. 1 second.
You're sharing your screen.
So, I'm not going to share my screen. I'm just going to tell you the current view count on this video, because nothing I do will ever be as good as this video in terms of the way that YouTube works. I made a video about a whale carcass that explodes. It like exploded. You know how like the gas builds up inside of them and they just explode? It was in the Faroe Islands, and this scientist cuts into it and it just goes like a shotgun. And it's a 1 minute video with my voice over the top describing what happens. It's done 21 million views.
I'm sorry.
And nothing I ever do ever will ever perform as well as that did. And I made that in half an hour. So if you want to know my work, go add to this 21 million viewed thing that I make absolutely no money from. Please do. No, I think maybe if you want to see content of mine, in the off chance that it gets it more views, I want you to go watch the Lucha episode of Explained on Lucha masks and why they exist, because I worked really hard on that one and I really like the editing. So please watch that one.
And then I don't normally wrap up with another question after that one, but it's a follow-up question that I've just thought of. So I apologize.
Go on, that's fine.
But what is Explained your favorite thing you've done on YouTube so far?
My favorite thing I've done on YouTube. No, I think I like Explained. I think it's a very good series. I'm very proud of it. I don't think it's my favorite thing that I've done on YouTube. I think my favorite thing that I was doing on YouTube was to do all the Screen Stalker stuff when that was a thing. That was just really silly, funny, stupid, like the cut down, like we did like cut down gameplay videos with like editing over the top, and kind of that's what the predictions videos were on WrestleTalk for a while. That was, I just applied that same style to a predictions video. Those are my favorite bits of content I think I've ever made, just because they're really funny and stupid, and I like that. And I think Explained is like the other part of my arsenal of like tricks, is like to make something thoughtful and in depth. But it's a lot of work, and actually making it sometimes makes you want to, if I had any hair to tear out, I might tear it out making that. Fair
enough. I think, if I'm honest, man, that's a lovely way to end it. So I want to say thank you for coming on, Laurie. Obviously, check out Parts of Unknown for Explained, but also check out WrestleTalk because they do great work over there. And so does Laurie with his Explained series. And I will see you in the next one. Bye. Bye.